So I'm going to give you a timeline about what's been going on right now. So Newsom versus federal government, and this started June 6th. That's when ICE raided some Home Depot parking lots, some retail stores, some construction sites, the usual. And then that sparked the protests that ended up becoming riots. June 10th, 5 days later, President Trump federalizes the California National Guard and deploys 700 Marines to LA without Governor Newsom's consent because the way he did it, which I'll get into now, he didn't need consent from the governor. So just to be clear, the deployment of National Guard is to detain and contain. It's not to arrest. That is not their job. That is for the Los Angeles Police Department and for the federal agents, ICE agents, that they also have a right to arrest those who they profile as undocumented, or better said, illegal migrants. And then the 700 Marines that were deployed, it was not to, people say, oh, it's to attack the civilians or Americans. That's false. It's literally to protect the ICE agents for them to continue enforcing immigration laws and to protect the federal buildings, meaning like ICE detention centers and stuff like that. So June 11th, the following day, that was, I believe, June 10th is what? Well, that was on a Tuesday, I think. And then let me check right now. June 10th, yeah. June 10th was on a Tuesday. June 11th, Governor Gavin Newsom files a federal lawsuit claiming the deployment violates state sovereignty, 10th Amendment, and disagrees with the Posse Comitatus Act, which we'll get into a little bit. And then June 12th, U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer issues a ruling that the deployment is unconstitutional, stating the Insurrection Act was stretched beyond recognition. However, Donald Trump did not use the Insurrection Act, so I don't know why that was even put in there. And then June 13th, the Biden-appointed Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals grants emergency stay, which means they blocked the district court's order to bring back the National Guard to the authority of the governor of California. Instead, the appeals court said, no, we're going to wait until the next hearing. So from June 14th to now, it's still under the authority of the Trump administration. And then there's a pending hearing for late June to early July that's going to escalate to the Supreme Court. So they're saying that he does not have the right to deploy National Guard because he's infringing on the 10th Amendment of the governors of the state, meaning, the state's sovereignty. However, the states did not actually follow the law by stopping the riots from escalating and getting worse and spreading. So by them not doing that, the president decided, okay, I have to step in. So we've been told to get ready for 30 days. So they're saying that they were supposed to give 30 days to Governor Newsom, let them know 30 days in advance. However, he doesn't have to do that because under Title IV, Article 4, it gives the president the power over the military in case there is unrest or rebellion. So that's one of the reasons that they did it. That's one. So Article 4 of the Constitution, Section 4, pretty much says the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion and the application of the legislature or the executive, against domestic violence. So he used that. And then he did not use the Insurrection Act. He used a legislative law, Title 10 of the United States Code, a massive section of federal law that governs the organization, structure in the U.S. and the use of armed forces. This was a law passed by Congress. So it includes laws covering military chain of command, rules for activating troops, and how when the president can federalize National Guard. So it pretty much says that they used Title 10 and this other provision called Posse Comitatus Act or something like that. I'm probably saying it wrong. To pretty much have the authority of National Guard and the Marines to protect federal officials, meaning ICE, and federal buildings. So he never used the Insurrection Act. He used a legislative law passed by Congress. Just want to make that really clear. So now that we have that, so we know that he never used the Insurrection Act. He's using a law passed by Congress. I'm going to go back in time here. Eisenhower, I believe it was in the 50s, 1957, Eisenhower used the Insurrection Act to stop pretty much racism in the South. Passed in 1807, the Insurrection Act gave the president the power to deploy federal troops, including the National Guard when federalized, under very specific conditions, to put down rebellions or insurrections against U.S. authority, to enforce federal laws when local or state governments cannot or will not. Okay. Before Eisenhower, it had been used mostly suppressing slave revolts pre-Civil War, ending labor riots and strikes, and quelling violent unrest during Reconstruction. Okay. So Eisenhower in 1957 used a major shift when it comes to the interpretation of the Insurrection Act, because he didn't use it for unrest or rebellion. He used it for civil rights. So Eisenhower expanded the scope by invoking it not because of violent rebellion, but because a governor, Fabius, however you say his name, defied a federal court order and used state forces to block integration. He argued that the governor's defiance and the mob intimidation at Little Rock Central High were an unlawful obstruction of federal laws, particularly Brown versus Board of Education. So Brown versus Board of Education is pretty much a constitutional law that ended up pretty much desegregating all schools. And then in Arkansas, in Little Rock, Arkansas, they were not following, specifically the governor chose to not follow that law. So he chose to not follow what the Supreme Court said, that is a constitutional right. And Eisenhower, instead of using the Insurrection Act as what it's always been used before, he used it against the civil rights violations against black students or black people, black citizens. Little Rock Crisis, 1957. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional, but many southern states resisted desegregation. One of the most infamous examples was in Little Rock, Arkansas. September 1957, 9 black students, later known as the Little Rock Nine, attempted to attend Little Rock Central High School as part of court-ordered integration. Governor Orville Fabius, Democrat of Arkansas, called in the Arkansas National Guard to block the students from entering the school. He claimed it was to prevent violence, but in reality it was to stop desegregation because he was racist. Typical for Democrats. It's always been that way. They're pretending that they're not, but they are. Because now they're doing the reverse racism, which is essentially the same thing. So Eisenhower initially tried to negotiate with Fabius, hoping to avoid federal intervention, but when Fabius refused to comply and mobs threatened the students' safety, Eisenhower took decisive action. September 24th, 1957, Eisenhower invoked the Insurrection Act. He federalized the Arkansas National Guard, stripping Fabius of control. He also sent in the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division to Little Rock to enforce the law. So that was the first time in history that the Insurrection Act was used to enforce constitutional civil rights, not just insurrections and rebellions. All right. So JFK did something very similar. JFK in 1963, he stopped a governor of Alabama from blocking a school, the University of Alabama, from 2 black students from enrolling in the school. And then LBJ, again, used the Insurrection Act. I don't know what time that was. I can look it up here. But he used the Insurrection Act to pretty much protect people that are protesting when it came to civil rights movement, when it was MLK time. So in the past, we've had presidents use the Insurrection Act on things that had nothing to do with rebellion. It had to do with civil rights and violation of the Constitution. So what I don't understand is, why is what Trump did controversial? It shouldn't be controversial, because the Insurrection Act has been used for things that are not rebellious reasons, and he never used the Insurrection Act. So even if he were to use it, it should still be justified because other presidents have used it in the past for things that are not rebellion, they're constitutional civil rights. So, and at the end of the day, if you're not here legally, then you definitely don't have a right to be protesting with the flag of the country you fled from. You know, doesn't make any sense. But you tell me what you guys think. I know that was like a big legal like gymnastics I had to do there because everything's like not in order. But you guys get the point. He should have a right to do this. I think it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and I think he is going to win in the Supreme Court because there's been precedent already that presidents have done this in the past, Democrat and Republican. So the fact that he's not being allowed to do it is just bias.